here we go. Let's start in the Big Ten. So the Big Ten this year is loaded at the top, which leads me to the inevitable question of, is the Big Ten East the best division in college football? Now, here's the very easy and short answer. Yes. Yes. Now, there are not a lot of divisions in college football anymore. So, let's, not take it too far. But yes, SEC still has divisions. Big Ten still has divisions. And the Big Ten East is loaded. Let's give some perspective on how good the Big Ten East is, at least here in the preseason. The last time that one division in college football had 3 teams open in the preseason top 10 was 2013. That was the SEC East with Georgia at 5, South Carolina at 6, and Florida at 10. We are all fully expecting, and we have seen now that Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State are opening in the top 10. If you look at my rankings, which came out last week, thank you for listening to that show, by the way, watching that show. And if you haven't, go back and check it out. My top 25 to start the year, you would see that they're all in the top 5. In most people's poll, Michigan's going to be 2 and Ohio State's going to be 3. And Penn State's going to land somewhere between 5 and 7 in most polls. So this is the best division in college football. So then, how does it shake out? Well, this becomes like a really interesting question to look at. And we start with the team that has won it in back-to-back seasons, which is Michigan. In order to win this division, I think that you're going to have to beat Michigan, right? That might go without being said, but they have the blueprint, and that blueprint ain't changing anytime soon. This is a team that clearly understands how to win football games and why they win football games, and they have done it so well over the last couple of years. Just look at these 2 numbers, and I think these 2 numbers really, well, they put it in perspective what this division is all about. 250 and 242. What do those represent? Those represent last year's rushing yards in the second half of the Ohio State and Penn State game. So Michigan was thoroughly dominant at the line of scrimmage when they needed to be against their 2 biggest opponents within their conference. So that's where this division is going to come down to. You're not going to beat Michigan unless you can control their run game. Okay? Neither of those teams were able to do that last year. And it looks like it's going to be even more difficult to do that moving forward into this year. Michigan's offensive line, at least on paper, to me, looks like one of the 2 best offensive lines in the country, along with potentially Georgia. The thing about Michigan's offensive line is that it's deep. Okay, there's 6, 7 guys that you could argue are draftable players, like NFL caliber offensive linemen in particular, once you look at the guys that they've brought in from the transfer portal. It leads me to believe that with their 2 backs, Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum, that this is going to be a team that can just bludgeon people to death. I don't think they're going to come out and try to be fancy and score 50 points a game. If they're going to get to 50, it's going to be the old-fashioned way, and they're just going to hammer away with the run game at the entire Big Ten schedule. Now, their schedule, in particular early, is not very difficult. So that run game is going to get its momentum early. I think that you're going to see what we saw from Stanford a few years ago. Remember when Stanford, they had that intellectual brutality mantra, and they would come out with, a 6th offensive lineman on the field as an extra tight end. They would have a 7th offensive lineman on the field at times. Michigan's going to have the ability to do that. They're going to create extra gaps. They're going to run power. They're going to do all sorts of different creative things in the run game. And this is one of the things that Jim Harbaugh is actually best at, and schematically, is finding different and unique ways to run the ball, add extra gaps, and force a defense to defend those extra gaps. They're going to do that, which means Ohio State and Penn State, what's your avenue to winning the division and representing the Big Ten East in the Big Ten championship game? You got to stop the run. You've got to control the run game of Michigan if you're going to win that side of the division. And that seems like it's going to be very difficult to do. Here's the other part that makes this tough for Ohio State and Penn State. Even if you do that, Now you've got to contend with a quarterback that has proven he can go out and win a game with his play. See, at this point last year, we didn't even know who was going to be the everyday starter for Michigan between Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy. Now we know, and it's J.J. McCarthy, and what we saw in the shoe last year, and even in a playoff loss, was that he could put the team on his back, and they could win because of the quarterback and not just with the quarterback. So even if Ohio State and Penn State can handle the run game, which is going to be very difficult, they're going to have to deal with a quarterback that has confidence and the ability to go win the game himself. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough. Ohio State has got to get better on the defensive line. Now, I think that they will be. This is what makes this so intriguing. The biggest question surrounding Ohio State for me is not about their quarterback. It's about their defensive line. Because if you go back and you listen to the shows right after their loss to Michigan, what did I say? I said they got beat on the interior of each line of scrimmage. Guard, center, guard, or defensive tackles. Michigan was better and tougher in those areas. Okay, Ohio State had an inability to run the ball. They got forced into, must-passing situations, and Michigan won the game. Michigan, they were able to control the game and late get Ohio State into vulnerable defensive structures based on their need to stop them, and then they were able to pop big runs. That's what happened in that game. And so, to me, that's exactly where Ohio State has to get better. Kyle McCord's going to be fine as a quarterback. If I'm a Buckeye fan, the last thing I'm worried about is the fact that I've got a new quarterback. The most imminent thing I'm concerned about is my defensive line good enough and better and up to par to stop the run of the Michigan Wolverines? Because that's the only way that they're going to go out there and win that division. Now, they're better. Guys like Mike Hall in there, they're better on the defensive line. They've got excellent pass rushers, but they better be stout in order to stop the run. Now, from Penn State's perspective, what's the avenue for Penn State? Well, they're built to beat Ohio State, not Michigan. If you go back to last year, and I know that one of them, was on the road. They went to Michigan. They had Ohio State at home. So you can say, well, maybe it was just location why they played Ohio State tougher than they did Michigan. See, I actually think it's blueprint. Penn State is built with speed and athleticism on defense. And James Franklin's done a heck of a job, right? That was the only two losses they had. Great Rose Bowl win for them. Like, Penn State is a hell of a team. But they're built to go and compete with and try to beat Ohio State because Ohio State was the benchmark in the Big Ten. But now all of a sudden, there's Michigan, and they play this bully style football that Penn State had no answer for a year ago. None. Not one answer for. That game wasn't even as close as the score indicated. At one point, people were like, well, it was a one-score game in the second quarter, early in the third. No. It wasn't close. It wasn't close. There was a kind of a nondescript turnover when Michigan was dominating and Penn State kind of scoops and scores, and all of a sudden it's like a one-score game, and it's like, no. It wasn't that tight to begin with. They hammered them with the run game. So from a stylistic standpoint, I think it's tough for Penn State. I love what they've got. Chop Robinson, namely up front to rush the quarterback. Abdul Carter. But again, Abdul Carter is not your traditional run-stuffing linebacker. He's a run, athletic, long, NFL-style hybrid linebacker at the second level. Kalen King, good player. Built to kind of match up with an offense that wants to throw the ball, like Ohio State. That's why it's tough for Penn State. Not saying that they can't. Not saying that they can't, because they've got a run game that could control the game, maybe get some big plays over the top with Drew Aller. They're going to be better, and they've got Michigan in their home stadium, which is going to be a big feather in their cap. I think their best avenue, Penn State's, would be hoping for a three-way tie. If I was a Penn State fan and I was like, how do we win the division and go play for a Big Ten title? I would hope for a three-way tie because of how different Ohio State and Michigan are, it's going to be almost insurmountable to try to ask a team to beat both of those teams. Again, because of the styles that you have to play to beat them. So where does that leave Penn State? Well, I've done the homework on this. And, well, really, my guy Steve, he and I He's my brain, editorial brain. Steve and I were talking, and he was like, well, let me look at the tiebreakers. So he goes through the tiebreakers, and we get to basically the top 4 tiebreakers. Let me give this caveat. If Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State all finish 11-1, and their only losses are to each other. So circa 2008, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and Texas. Remember that debacle? Here's what it comes down to. The top 4 tie-breaking models in the Big Ten would basically be a wash because it would all be about win percentage that you had versus like common opponents and everything. But again, they would just lose to each other. So all of those, basically, it just keeps moving and moving and moving until you get to the 5th tiebreaker. And the 5th tiebreaker says, whatever the record is of your non-divisional opponents, now it gets interesting. I mean, like, come for the party right here. So let's look at their non-divisional opponents, shall we? Michigan has Nebraska, Minnesota, and Purdue. Ohio State has Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Purdue. So 2 of them So it basically comes down to a difference for Michigan and Ohio State between 2 teams, Nebraska and Wisconsin. Penn State's non-division opponents, Illinois, Iowa, and Northwestern. And every Penn State fan is like, no, Northwestern, no. I think that the advantage in a 3-way tie goes to Ohio State. If you're just basing this based off of Vegas win prediction for the 3 teams, obviously Minnesota and Purdue would be similar. So the difference being Nebraska and Wisconsin. Ohio State's 3 non-divisional opponents have a Vegas prediction of 21 wins. Michigan's non-division opponents have a Vegas prediction of 18 wins. And Penn State's non-division opponents have a Vegas win prediction of 17.5. So what I'm telling you is, Penn State, you've got to immediately right now get on the Hawkeyes bandwagon and pray that Northwestern is not as bad as we think they are, because those 2 things have to happen if you're going to win a 3-team tiebreak. Oh, fun stuff there in the Big Ten. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.